There's a point you reach where silence starts to say so much more than words ever could. It's that moment when all the noise of desire fades into a deep stillness and you start to hear a different rhythm, a pulse that was always there hidden beneath the surface. That feeling isn't hunger, it's your soul starting to remember its own strength. You know we live in a world that's constantly teaching us to chase things to touch, to get to consume. But how often are we taught to just pause? In that pause, something ancient inside of us begins to wake up. It's not the fear of missing out, but the complete freedom of tuning in. The practice of abstinence isn't about denying yourself. At its core, it's about rediscovery. It's the beautiful art of letting the body become quiet so that the soul can finally have a chance to speak. When most people hear the word abstinence, their minds immediately jump to everything they're losing. They think about deprivation, sacrifice, and all the things they're not allowed to have. But for those who are truly on a path of self-mastery, abstinence isn't a barren desert. It's a lush garden. It's not about the absence of something, but the redirection of everything. Every single ounce of your energy, every breath of your attention, every spark of desire is no longer scattered and lost to the outside world. Instead, it's reclaimed and drawn inward. And when that redirection happens, something incredibly powerful begins to unfold. The constant noise in your head quiets down. The inner storm starts to calm, and that silent voice within you begins to rise. In traditional Eastern philosophy, there's a core belief that energy is never wasted. It is only transformed. The body, the mind, and the spirit are all seen as one interconnected flowing system. So what you choose to withhold on one level actually nourishes another. When we choose to abstain not because of fear or shame, but from a place of wisdom, we begin to accumulate our life energy, what the Chinese call qi. This energy, when it's not being scattered by constant indulgence or emotional impulses, starts to consolidate inside of us. And where does it go? It starts to strengthen the very foundations of your awareness, your clarity, and your presence. In this way, abstinence becomes the very furnace where your focus is forged. Imagine a river that's always flooding its banks, just rushing wildly without any real direction. This is how so many of us live our lives. In a state of constant stimulation, endlessly seeking the next thing, rushing from one experience to the next without ever taking a breath. But what happens when you build a dam or a channel for that river? Suddenly that same water has force. It can move turbines. It can generate immense power. It is exactly the same with our desires. When you learn to give your desire direction, it transforms into willpower. When you learn to restrain it wisely, it transforms into presence. I once knew a man, let's call him David, who was in his late 50s. He told me he had spent most of his adult life chasing one relationship after another. He had been married 3 times, and he admitted that in between those marriages, he rarely, if ever, allowed himself to just be alone. He was always moving, always seeking companionship, validation, or some form of connection from someone else. But he finally reached a breaking point where it all just felt empty. One day, completely exhausted, he said to me, "I don't even know what I want anymore. I only know how to chase. I've never learned how to be still." So, he decided to do something that most people would consider radical. He chose to practice a full year of complete abstinence. No dating, no intimacy, and no emotional entanglements. But even more importantly, he stopped seeking. He told me that at first the silence was absolutely unbearable. He said it was like someone had suddenly turned off all the music in a room where he'd been dancing blindly for decades. But slowly within that heavy silence, something began to shift. He started to reconnect with the feeling of his own breath. He started to actually feel his feet on the ground. And for the first time in his life, he could hear his own thoughts, not the thoughts driven by desperate desire, but the ones that were born from his own inner truth. That single year changed everything for him. And it wasn't because he gained something new, but because he finally discovered what was already there all along. He found his own strength, his own discernment, his own boundaries. He told me later, "Now I can love someone from a place of fullness, not from a place of hunger." And that, he said, has made all the difference. This is the very essence of abstinence when we see it as an energetic redirection. You are not starving your life. You are strengthening your soul. From a scientific perspective, this makes perfect sense. In neuroscience, we now understand that our habits, including our emotional and sexual habits, carve these deeply embedded patterns in our brain's reward system. When you repeatedly act on a certain desire, your brain becomes conditioned to associate pleasure with that external thing. But when you consciously practice abstinence, especially from compulsive behaviors, something amazing happens. The brain literally starts to rewire itself. It's a process called neuroplasticity, the brain's incredible ability to adapt and change. Abstinence creates the space necessary for the brain's reward pathways to reset. The dopamine system, which is the very mechanism that drives our cravings and impulsivity, gradually begins to calm down. And what's the result? You gain greater impulse control, more mental clarity, and deeper emotional resilience. What the ancient monks and sages understood through centuries of meditation and self-restraint neuroscience is now beginning to confirm with data. And why is this so critical when it comes to relationships? Because when your own nervous system is calm, your presence deepens. And presence is the true foundation of intimacy. It's not touch, it's not words, it's not even chemistry, it's presence. When you are calm and centered within yourself, your partner can feel safe beside you. When you don't seek them out to complete you or fix you, they can meet you from a place of genuine equality, not messy entanglement. In this light, abstinence is not about rejection. It's about refinement. It's the conscious choice to refine your own inner state before you share it with another person. And in doing so, you become magnetic. Not in a superficial or seductive way, but in the way a strong, still, and centered mountain naturally draws the clouds. There's a classic story from the Taoist tradition about a young disciple who was completely infatuated with a girl from the local village. He felt like his desire for her was just consuming him. One day his master noticed how distracted he had become in his training, so he led him to a quiet well in the forest. The master said, "Stare into the water." "What do you see?" The disciple looked and replied, "I see my reflection." Then the master picked up a small stone and dropped it into the well. The water's surface exploded into ripples. Now the master asked, "What do you see?" The disciple looked again and said, "Nothing. I only see waves." The master smiled. "That is your mind when it is consumed by desire. It's distorted. It's unclear. Now wait." They waited together in complete silence. Eventually the ripples subsided and the water grew still once more. The disciple looked in and said, "Now my reflection returns." The master placed a hand on the young man's shoulder and said, "Abstinence is not meant to suppress your desire, but to still the mind long enough so that you can see yourself clearly. Only then will you know whether what you seek is real love or just an illusion." The lesson here is absolutely timeless. Without developing inner stillness, we can never truly know what we want. And without that clarity, our relationships just become messy mirrors of our own inner confusion. When the body is always in motion, always chasing, touching, reacting, it leaves absolutely no room for the soul to speak. But when we intentionally bring the body into stillness, when we discipline our desires, not through brute force, but through wisdom, something extraordinary happens. The soul begins to communicate. It speaks through sensation, through the rhythm of your breath, through a deep sense of intuition. You start to feel when someone is being genuine. You can sense when their words actually match their energy. You begin to pick up on emotional undercurrents that were completely invisible to you before. This isn't magic. It is sensitivity. And sensitivity is not a weakness. It is a higher form of intelligence. It allows you to navigate the complex world of relationships with grace, to sense when someone is hurting without them having to say a single word, and to know exactly when to speak and when to simply remain silent. This profound level of attunement is only possible when your own inner world isn't being drowned out by constant noise. I remember another story, this one from a woman in her 40s, who had just ended a very long and difficult relationship. She felt emotionally drained, and she wasn't even sure who she was anymore. So, she decided to take 6 months of what she called emotional abstinence. This wasn't just about physical celibacy, it was a complete pause from any romantic or emotionally charged connections. No dating apps, no late-night texting, no replaying what could have been over and over in her head. Instead, she turned all of that energy inward. She started journaling every day. She practiced breathwork. She took long walks in nature without her headphones, and she slowly learned to just sit with her own company. She said that at first it felt like a painful withdrawal, like she was missing a limb. But slowly she realized that what she had been addicted to wasn't really love. It was distraction. The distraction of needing another person's validation. The comfort of not having to face her own feelings of emptiness. But in the quiet, her creativity started to return. Her natural laughter came back. She wrote in her journal, "I thought I had lost myself in the relationship, but truthfully, I had never even fully met myself until now." This is the kind of powerful transformation that abstinence can unlock. When all the noise finally stops, what emerges is not emptiness. It is your true self. In psychology, this relates directly to the concept of interoception, which is our ability to perceive the internal state of our own body. People who practice mindful abstinence often report having a heightened sense of interoceptive awareness. They become more attuned to their breath, their heartbeat, and the subtle energy shifts within them. And with this newfound awareness comes profound emotional regulation. You begin to notice when anxiety is just starting to arise long before it has a chance to overwhelm you. You recognize that tightness in your chest before an argument can escalate. You learn to respond to situations rather than just reacting to them. And in your relationships, this creates an environment of incredible safety and deep respect. In this way, abstinence becomes a form of emotional hygiene. Just as we might fast to give our digestive system a rest, we can abstain from certain interactions to give our heart the space it needs to heal. It's a way to cleanse the subtle toxins of past disappointments, old attachments, and the unconscious patterns that keep us stuck. And this space you create is not a void. It is sacred. It is the place where your inner compass gets recalibrated. In Eastern medicine, the kidneys are seen as the root of our life force. They govern our willpower and our inner stamina. It's believed that excessive indulgence, especially sexual activity that isn't grounded in real connection, depletes this vital energy. But through conscious periods of abstinence, the kidneys are replenished. Your will becomes strong again. And from this strength, a new clarity arises, not just about other people, but about your own life's purpose. So, what does this all mean for you in your everyday life? It means that when you find yourself constantly needing someone else's attention, just to feel good about yourself, it's time to pause. When you notice you're always seeking touch or conversation or connection, simply to avoid the feeling of loneliness, it's time to pause. When your desire starts to feel frantic, like when your mind races with thoughts by what if they leave me, or what if I'm not enough? It's time to pause. And you're not doing this to punish yourself, but to listen. Because underneath all of that urgency, there is often a much quieter truth, a deep need that can never be met from the outside. When the body is still, the soul begins to whisper. And it says things like, "You are already whole. You do not need to be needed in order to be valuable. You get to choose when and how you give your energy away. You can love someone deeply without losing yourself in the process." This is the point where abstinence transforms into liberation. You're not liberating yourself from other people, but from your dependency on them. It opens up a space where real love can grow, not as a form of attachment, but as a genuine offering. As we move from this idea of energetic redirection, another powerful principle starts to emerge. The stillness of the body unlocks the language of the soul. You begin to see that silence is not absence at all. It is presence intensified. To live in a state of presence isn't about withdrawing from life, but about entering it more fully without resistance, without distortion, and without the chaos of being ruled by your own untamed emotions. Presence is the discipline of being wholly and completely right where you are. It's the quiet art of anchoring your attention in the now, not letting it get pulled away by old memories, future expectations, or the endless stimulation of the outside world. And yet presence is not just for monks meditating on a mountaintop. It is a vital skill in every single relationship, in every conversation, and in every moment where a human heart is just seeking to be understood. Presence is not a performance, it is a vibration. When someone is truly present with you, you can feel it. Their eyes aren't darting around the room. Their breath is calm and steady. Their nervous system doesn't feel threatening or grasping. It feels open and still. In their presence, you don't feel judged, and you don't feel invisible. You simply feel seen. This isn't some kind of mystery. It's pure physiology. Your nervous system, that vast web of communication between your brain, your body, and your environment, is designed to constantly scan for safety. This process, which scientists call neuroception, happens entirely below the level of your conscious thought. The moment you enter a room, meet a new person, or even hear a certain tone of voice, your body already knows whether to soften or to tense up, whether to open or to defend. When you are truly present, your breath naturally slows down. Your shoulders drop. Your voice becomes steady. You are no longer projecting future worries or replaying past wounds in your head. In this state, your parasympathetic nervous system, often called the rest and digest system, becomes active. This system sends a powerful signal to your own body and to the bodies of others around you that says it is safe here. In our relationships, presence is the invisible thread that holds trust together. It is not the cleverness of your words, nor the depth of your feelings that makes someone feel truly secure with you. It is the regulation of your own internal state. When your nervous system is regulated, other people can feel that regulation, and this feeling, this embodied sense of safety, is what allows them to open up to share vulnerably and to connect with you authentically. There's a story I once heard from a therapist who worked with couples on the verge of divorce. One couple had been married for 20 years, but had become completely emotionally estranged. The wife said, "He's never really with me. Even when we're sitting here talking, I feel completely alone." The husband, feeling defensive and frustrated, shot back, "But I am here. I come home every night. I ask you how your day was. What more do you want from me?" The therapist, instead of giving them advice, asked them to try a little experiment. She said, "For the next 5 minutes, I want you to say nothing at all. Just face each other, and just be present. No fixing, no proving a point, no performing." They reluctantly agreed. At first, they sat there stiffly in an awkward silence. But as the silence deepened, something began to shift. The husband's defensive posture started to soften. The wife's rapid breathing began to slow down. Tears started to well up in her eyes. When the 5-minute timer finally went off, she whispered, This is what I've been missing. Not your words, just you." This is the profound difference between simple physical proximity and true emotional presence. One touches the body, the other touches the soul. And yet presence doesn't just happen by accident. It is cultivated. It is protected. And very often it is born from practicing abstinence. Not necessarily abstinence from people, but from distractions. From the compulsive checking of our phones. From the constant need to express our opinions. From the addictive craving to always be stimulated. True presence arises when we intentionally create space within ourselves. It happens when we abstain from all the mental noise long enough for stillness to become our natural state. In Eastern martial arts, students are trained to regulate their breath long before they ever learn how to strike. Why? Because your breath is your life force. It is the bridge between your conscious and your unconscious mind. When your breath is shallow and quick, your mind becomes anxious. When your breath is deep and steady, your mind becomes anchored. This doesn't just apply in combat. It applies in every conflict and in every relationship. Every argument you have is a test of your breath. Every moment of tension is an invitation to either stay rooted in your center or to completely lose it. Try this for yourself. The next time you find yourself in a heated moment about to say something you might regret, just pause. Take one slow, full breath in through your nose. Feel the air fill your belly, not just your chest. Hold it for a moment, then release it slowly. And in that tiny space you've created, ask yourself, am I speaking right now to connect, or am I speaking to control? Often that one single breath is the difference between a knee-jerk reaction and a wise response. It's the difference between wounding someone and truly understanding them. Modern neuroscience now confirms what ancient wisdom has known for centuries. Conscious breathing activates the vagus nerve, which is a key component of our calming parasympathetic system. This not only slows your heart rate and reduces stress hormones like cortisol, but it also increases your ability to feel empathy. When you are calm, you can perceive nuance. You can sense the emotional layers hidden beneath someone's words. You can respond not from your wound, but from your wisdom. Presence also has a posture. Your body speaks a language that your mind can never fake. When your spine is upright, when your chest is open, when your shoulders are relaxed, you emit an aura of confidence and openness. Not arrogance, not submission, but a kind of natural dignity. This posture isn't for show. It is a direct message to your own nervous system that says, I am grounded, I am safe. Others feel this, especially children, and especially partners who have been hurt in the past. They know without knowing how they know whether you are truly with them, and they respond accordingly. A teacher of mine used to say, the way you sit at the dinner table is the way you sit in life. What he meant was that your body is always revealing your mind. If you are slouched over fidgeting, scrolling on your phone, or tense, then your mind is not calm. If your body is grounded, alert, yet at ease, then your mind is most likely clear. This is why things like posture and breath are not small details. They are portals to a deeper presence. And presence is the doorway to true connection. Let's now look more closely at another essential dimension of this journey, the building of emotional musculature through abstinence. Just like your physical body grows stronger through resistance training, your emotional body grows stronger through intentional restraint. Every single time you choose not to lash out in anger, not to indulge in an unhealthy habit, not to chase after comfort when you feel lonely, you are strengthening your emotional core. And just like physical strength, emotional strength isn't always visible on the surface, but it is always felt by you and by those around you. There's a huge misconception that emotional freedom means just doing whatever we feel like in the moment. But in truth, that is emotional captivity. To be truly free emotionally is not to act on every single feeling that passes through you, but to be aware of them, to be able to sit with them, and then to choose a wise response. This is where abstinence becomes a discipline, not just of the body, but of the heart. A young woman, let's call her Sarah, once shared her story of heartbreak. After being abruptly ghosted by someone she was getting serious about, she felt a storm of emotions, anger, sadness, confusion, and intense longing. Her immediate urge was to text him, to call to confront him, maybe even post some cryptic messages online, but something inside of her just paused. She remembered a teaching from a meditation class she had taken: do not make a move until the water is clear. So she didn't act, she didn't react. Instead, she just sat with the feelings. She journaled, she cried, she focused on her breathing. She just watched the waves of emotion rise and fall inside her. And after a few days, the desperate need to reach out to him completely faded. What remained was something much deeper: self-respect, clarity. She realized that her pain was very real, but it did not have to own her. That choice she made, the choice not to act on her initial impulse, is what we can call emotional musculature. It is strength of the absolute highest order. In relationships, this strength is vital, because love without discipline quickly becomes attachment, and attachment, when it's left unchecked, becomes dependence. But when you have trained your emotional muscles through abstinence, through pausing, through making conscious choices, you bring a gift to your relationships. You bring an offering, not a need. You bring presence, not hunger. And this offering is incredibly powerful. It says to the other person, I want you, but I do not need you to fill my void. I choose you not because I'm incomplete, but because I'm already full, and I wish to share this fullness with you. This is the very essence of a sacred partnership. But let's not romanticize this process. Emotional abstinence, just like physical training, is often uncomfortable. It is the conscious decision to sit with your discomfort instead of immediately distracting yourself from it. It's the discipline of not sending that angry text, of not indulging in the revenge fantasy, of not spiraling into those old familiar stories about being unloved or unwanted. In these difficult moments, the path forward is not always clear, but the practices are always the same: pause, breathe, observe. Just as a warrior trains in silence before they ever face a battle, so must we train in stillness before we engage with our emotions. This kind of training also literally rewires your brain. In psychological terms, when we resist the pull of impulsive emotional behavior, we are strengthening our prefrontal cortex. This is the part of the brain responsible for higher-level decision-making, regulation, and foresight. Over time, this gives us much greater control over our emotional impulses. It becomes easier to respond with wisdom, even when we are under intense stress. Abstinence builds this capacity. Every time you choose not to indulge a harmful emotion, you are actively reprogramming your mind. You are teaching it that discomfort is not dangerous. You're teaching it that feeling something intensely doesn't mean you have to act on it immediately. This delay, this sacred pause, is the space where all growth happens. There was once a monk who said, "Every time you feel the fire of anger rise within you, do not rush to put it out and do not throw it at someone else. Instead, let it burn inward. Let it warm your clarity. Then speak from the embers, not from the flames." This kind of emotional transmutation is not suppression. It is alchemy. You don't deny the emotion. You use it. You channel it. You allow it to refine you. Abstinence, then, is not about being cold. It's about containment. It is the decision to become a vessel that is strong enough to hold intense emotions without carelessly spilling them onto other people. This capacity is rare in our world, but it is what makes someone truly dependable in love. Not just passionate, but trustworthy. Not just emotionally expressive, but emotionally intelligent. To reach this level of discipline is not to reject pleasure or love or connection. It is to honor them. It is to bring to them the full strength of your inner mastery. It is to be able to say, I do not need to possess you. I choose to relate to you as an equal, with presence, with patience, and with depth. It is in this rich soil that true intimacy can finally grow, where two hearts can meet not in desperation, but in devotion, where love is not a storm that sweeps you away, but a steady flame that warms and endures. And so we walk forward, breathing a little deeper, standing a little taller, pausing a little longer, not out of fear, but out of a deep reverence. Because the relationship we hold with ourselves will always determine the relationships we are capable of holding with others. When we talk about abstinence, so many people still think only of denial. They think about what is being withheld, what is being renounced. But for the person who walks the inner path, abstinence is never about emptiness. It is about space. And space is not an absence. It is potential. It is the sacred gap between a stimulus and your response, the space between a craving and your action, the space between an expectation and your embodiment. When we talk about cultivating relational clarity through abstinence, we are not talking about avoiding relationships. We are talking about seeing them clearly, without distortion, without projection, and without the thick smokescreen of our own unmet inner needs. In a world that is so addicted to validation, to distraction, and to hurried intimacy, choosing abstinence becomes a radical form of purification. It clears the lenses through which we view other people, and perhaps more importantly, it clears the mirror through which we view ourselves. What is it you truly seek in another person? Do you seek a witness or a rescuer, a partner, or just a placeholder for your pain? Without creating silence, how will you ever be able to hear the difference? There is a quiet wisdom that is found only in solitude. But solitude by itself is not enough. One must learn to bring awareness into that solitude. That is where the real transformation happens. When the body goes silent and chooses to abstain from its usual patterns of seeking touch, stimulation, flattery, or performance, the soul finally begins to speak. And what it says is not always comforting. Sometimes it reveals just how much of your desire for connection is actually a deep desire to escape from yourself. A woman once shared that after a long series of toxic relationships, she made a vow to herself no dating for 1 full year. Not because she hated men, and not because she had given up on love, but because for the first time, she truly wanted to meet herself. She said, I needed to know the sound of my own thoughts without having someone else's opinion in my ear. I needed to learn what made me feel safe without having to beg for it from someone else. That year was not easy for her. The first few months were filled with loneliness, temptation, and crippling self-doubt. But then something remarkable happened. Around the 6th month, she began to feel a new kind of peace settle over her. She no longer instinctively reached for her phone to fill every moment of silence. She no longer dressed to impress a stranger's gaze. She no longer shrank or stretched herself to try and match someone else's preference. She became crystal clear not only about what she wanted in a partner, but about who she was as a partner. This is the profound clarity that abstinence brings. It's not the kind of clarity that comes from overthinking, but the kind that comes from simply being. In Eastern philosophy, the mind is often likened to a lake. When it's agitated and choppy, it's impossible to see anything that lies beneath the surface. It is only when the waters become completely still that we can gain insight into the depths. Our relationships reflect this exact truth. When you enter into a relationship from a place of inner emotional turbulence, everything you see is distorted. You don't see the person as they truly are. You see what your nervous system either hopes or fears they might be. Clarity gained through abstinence allows you to finally separate your projections from reality. You no longer seek a savior. You seek someone you can meet soul to soul without any masks. You don't demand that they complete you. You simply desire that they walk beside you, whole and complete in themselves. But this clarity is not just a psychological state. It is also a physiological one. When your nervous system is constantly flooded with stimulation, whether it's sexual, emotional, or digital, it loses its natural sensitivity. Just like a muscle that is overused becomes sore and numb. The emotional body, when it is overstimulated, becomes confused. It can no longer differentiate between a real, authentic connection and an addictive, familiar pattern. Abstinence resets this system. It detoxifies your inner receptors. It gives you back the ability to sense things, not just with your mind, but with your entire body. Have you ever noticed how after fasting from sugar for a while, even a simple piece of fruit tastes incredibly vibrant and sweet? The exact same thing is true for emotional fasting. When you abstain from the numbing habits of performative dating, hollow compliments, and shallow intimacy, even a genuine conversation becomes incredibly rich. A simple touch can feel profound. A shared moment of silence can feel sacred. But we have to be willing to endure that initial discomfort. For many people, abstinence reveals just how much of their emotional life has been built on a foundation of avoiding themselves. In that silence, old fears start to surface: the fear of not being lovable, the fear of being invisible, the fear of being abandoned. These fears do not come to punish you. They come to be seen. They come to be healed. If you are always running into someone else's arms to escape them, you will never know which wounds are truly yours to tend to. A man once shared how his lifelong pattern of jumping from one relationship to the next was finally broken after he practiced 6 months of celibacy and solitude. He said, "I realized that I had never once asked myself what I actually value in a woman beyond physical attraction. I was so terrified of being alone that I confused chemistry with compatibility, lust with love, and her presence with my own self-worth." When he finally returned to the world of dating, he moved slowly. He asked deeper questions. He listened not just to what people were saying, but to their energy. And most importantly, he listened to himself. Abstinence had given him more than just self-control. It had given him discernment. And discernment is the beginning of all wisdom in love. Without it, we are just driven by our impulses, our fantasies, and our fears. With it, we can make choices that honor both ourselves and the other person. Now, consider this. The kind of partner you attract is almost always a reflection of the kind of energy you radiate. When your energy is chaotic, unclear, and needy, you tend to attract people who thrive on that same instability. But when your energy is calm, rooted, and self-sourced, you begin to attract people who are similarly aligned. Abstinence is the training that teaches you how to cultivate that calm, rooted energy. It teaches you how to generate love from within so that love from the outside becomes a beautiful complement, not a desperate crutch. In Chinese medicine, we often speak of Jing, which is our foundational life essence. This essence is diminished by excess, by overindulgence, by scattering one's energy in too many directions at once. But it is replenished through stillness, through breathwork, through sexual restraint, and through inner cultivation. A person whose Jing is strong is naturally magnetic. They don't have to chase attention, they attract it. Not through clever strategies, but through their very substance. In a relationship, this translates to an undeniable presence. People can sense it. They may not understand why they feel so safe and so drawn to you, but they do. And it's often because you are no longer leaking your energy everywhere. You are whole. The next step in this unfolding journey of abstinence and self-mastery is deeply connected to relational integrity. It's about cultivating a sacred intention. This is the awareness not only of what you are choosing, but why you are choosing it. Most people enter into relationships blindly driven by hormones, loneliness, or social pressure. They attach themselves to others without ever understanding the deeper energetic impact of their choices. But bringing a sacred intention to the process transforms everything. It brings consciousness to your connections. Every act of intimacy then becomes a conscious choice. You're not just trying to experience pleasure, but to exchange energy. You're not just trying to be seen, but to truly see another. You're not just there to take, but to offer. To truly understand this intention, you first need the space that abstinence provides. Because when you abstain, you have time to observe. You have time to reflect. You start to ask questions that are rarely asked in the initial rush of desire. Is my attraction to this person rooted in truth, or is it rooted in my trauma? Am I drawn to them because they reflect my highest values, or because they seem to soothe my oldest wounds? Sacred intention is all about direction. It's about asking, where is this connection leading us both individually and together? This isn't about trying to control the outcome, but about having clarity of movement. If the connection brings both people closer to their own inner truth, then it is sacred. If it consistently leads to self-betrayal, then it is a warning sign. There's a well-known quote from the poet Rumi that says, "Try not to resist the changes that come your way. Instead, let life live through you." Sacred intention doesn't resist change, but it also doesn't abandon discernment. It understands that not all chemistry is meant to be chased. Some energetic connections are meant to come into your life to teach you something, and then to pass through. There was once a woman who met a man during a yoga teacher training. They had instant, undeniable chemistry. Their conversations just flowed. They held each other's gaze. Their laughter felt effortless. But something inside of her had changed. After years of deep inner healing, of practicing celibacy, of strengthening her emotional boundaries, she had become incredibly sensitive to energy. So, instead of rushing headfirst into a relationship, she waited. She observed. And over time she noticed that, while their conversations were beautiful, his actions were inconsistent. He would often disappear emotionally, he avoided her deeper questions, and he was always vague about his true intentions. In the past, she would have ignored all of these red flags, hoping that their powerful chemistry would somehow overcome the confusion. But now, with a sacred intention guiding her, she chose to step back. She honored the attraction she felt, but she honored herself more. And in doing so, she remained in alignment not just with her desires, but with her integrity. This is the power of abstinence. It sharpens your inner compass. It teaches you not to sacrifice your own peace for a temporary pleasure. It teaches you that the quality of your relationship with yourself sets the standard for every other bond in your life. To cultivate a sacred intention also means to become mindful of the rituals you bring into your connections. How do you touch? How do you listen? How do you show up not just on the good days, but on the difficult ones? Intimacy in its highest and truest form is a spiritual practice. It is not something you just fall into by accident. It is something you walk into with devotion. And devotion requires discipline. There is an old Zen story about a monk who was asked how he approached every interaction. He said, "I enter each moment with three things: attention, respect, and emptiness. Attention to truly see the other person. Respect to honor their humanity. And emptiness, to not let my own past cloud this present meeting." What would our relationships look like if we all entered them in this way? Abstinence is what prepares us for such an approach. It clears out the residue of past lovers, past mistakes, and past versions of ourselves. It makes room, and into that clear room, our intention can flow like a stream, gentle, clear, and unstoppable. The soul does not rush. It waits until the waters are still. Then it speaks. And when it finally speaks, it doesn't offer commands. It offers clarity. This clarity is what transforms abstinence from a feeling of deprivation into an act of devotion. It is no longer about what you are avoiding, but about what you are preparing yourself to receive. To walk this path is not to become cold or detached. It is to become deeply warm, but wisely guarded. Not closed off, but selective. Not hardened, but refined. In this way, abstinence becomes the ultimate act of love. Not just for others, but for yourself. It becomes a sacred commitment where you say to the universe, "I will not settle. I will not self-abandon. I will not dilute my energy to fit into something that no longer honors my truth." And from this powerful place, real love can finally grow. Not the kind that burns fast and quickly disappears, but the kind that roots itself deep into the soil of your being and blooms season after season with strength, softness, and soul. When the body goes silent, the soul speaks, not with noise, but with a deep, quiet knowing. This journey through abstinence has never really been about denial. It has always been about remembrance. Remembering who you are when no one else is watching. Remembering what you truly value when there is nothing there to distract you. Remembering that your deepest needs are not met through constant stimulation, but through stillness, clarity, and presence. In the silence of abstinence, you begin to finally hear the truth that the noise of the world constantly tries to drown out. You hear that you are not empty when you are alone. You are whole. That love is not something to be chased. It is something to align with. That intimacy is not measured by the closeness of two bodies, but by the honesty of two souls. You have learned that every moment of abstinence, whether it's sexual, emotional, or even digital, is not a loss, but a return. A return to self-discipline, a return to sacred intention, a return to the profound wisdom of your own nervous system, which is no longer hijacked by urgency, but is finely tuned to peace. You now understand that relationships do not begin when two people meet. They begin long before that, in how you prepare for that meeting. They begin in the inner spaces you clear, the wounds you tend to, and the energy you cultivate. Abstinence, when it is used consciously, is how we make that sacred space. Space for something deeper, for something real. As my friend Master Shi Heng Yi would remind us, self-mastery is not about suppression. It is about balance. And balance comes from awareness. Awareness of the body, the breath, the emotions, and the soul. In abstinence, you are not becoming less. You are becoming more whole, more grounded, and more radiant in your own presence. So, when you choose silence, choose it not out of fear, but out of a deep respect for your journey, for your energy, and for the quality of love you are willing to receive. Let that silence shape your discernment. Let it clarify your intention. Let it prepare you not to escape from the world, but to enter it with the quiet strength of someone who no longer needs anything from it to feel complete. This is the truth behind abstinence. It is not the absence of desire. It is the elevation of it. It is desire that has become refined, embodied, and sacred. And from that sacred space, true connection is born. Not from hunger, but from fullness. Not from loneliness, but from love.